At the time of recording, it's been almost a week since the Minnesota Wild failed to sign their 2018 first-round draft pick, Filip Johansson. Johansson was taken 24th overall, with the hopes of him potentially developing into a decent defenseman, but since they failed to sign him, Johansson can now re-enter the draft if he so chooses. Although it seems highly unlikely, considering he signed a 2-year extension in Sweden less than 6 months ago. Well, because of this, the Wild will also receive a compensatory draft pick 32 spots downwards, essentially being rewarded due to poor drafting, getting the 56th overall pick in the second round. But if Johansson re-enters the draft, what's stopping the Wild from potentially drafting him again? Well, nothing. And surely no NHL team would draft the same player they let go, right? Well, allow me to introduce you to goaltender Matthew Chenard, as his story is absolutely bizarre. Chenard was a highly sought-after goaltending prospect in the 1998 NHL draft, being ranked first amongst Quebec goaltenders and second amongst North American goaltenders. So, in need of a goaltender, the Ottawa Senators would snag Matthew 15th overall. Chenard would head back to juniors for further development, making the All-Star team in 1999 and recording a 2.74 goals against average and 5 shutouts. He was looking like a potential NHL starter, one that Ottawa would benefit from. Just one tiny problem, however. Matthew Chenard wanted nothing to do with the Senators, dragging out the negotiation process to the point where both sides failed to come to an agreement, resulting in Chenard re-entering the draft and Ottawa getting an additional second-round pick in the 2000 draft. And when it came time for the Sens to make their selection, they used that second-round pick to once again draft Matthew Chenard. Sens general manager Marshall Johnson insisted, quote, "I don't think there'll be a negative reaction. If we drafted him again, it's because we like him." Chenard was then pretty much forced to sign his entry-level contract, and he would for the most part be banished to the minor leagues, never actually playing a game with the Ottawa Senators. Perhaps we'll never know just how good he would have been had Ottawa not completely trashed his development. Chenard isn't the only player to have been drafted in 98 and then redrafted in 2000, as Mike Milbury would do Mike Milbury things, making yet another questionable selection. The 1998 draft had a theme. Teams wanted size and grit, big bodies who could lay a pounding on the opposition, and Milbury wanted in on this, and with the 9th overall pick, he would select Mike Rupp. Rupp wasn't bad necessarily, he just wasn't a real offensive producer, making this selection very questionable at the time and still to this day. And of course, to add on top of all of that, Milbury couldn't come to terms with Rupp, forcing him to re-enter the draft. Rupp surprisingly would make the Islanders pay, as he would get taken by the New Jersey Devils in the 2000 draft, and the events that followed sound like something out of a movie. The Devils of the 2000s were extremely good, and were consistent contenders for the Stanley Cup, and just 3 years after arriving in New Jersey, Rupp and the Devils would make the Stanley Cup final. And in the second period of a potential cup-clinching game, Mike Rupp would make history.
Held in near side by Rupp. Rupp, the young rookie who came to the playoffs late for the Devils, but has played physically big. Freezing. Rupp picks it up, trying to go back to the point. Did. White shot, blocked by Niedermeyer. Scott Niedermeyer scores!
That goal would go on to become the game winner, as the Devils would win the cup that night. Later in his career, Rupp would also join the Islanders' crosstown rivals in the New York Rangers. So, although he didn't become a mega superstar, the subtle things he did throughout his career perhaps would have helped the Islanders had he come to terms with an entry-level contract. Nick Boynton holds an NHL record as he was uniquely drafted twice by 2 different teams, both times in the first round. Boynton ended up becoming a gritty defenseman, one who could pack a punch, but in juniors, he was actually over a point per game, posting a total of 55 points in 51 OHL games. The Washington Capitals had the 9th overall pick, which they used to take Nick Boynton.
Defenseman from Ottawa, the Ontario Hockey League, Nick Boynton.
They obviously had high hopes for the defenseman, but of course they couldn't agree to terms, causing Nick to re-enter the draft in 1999. The 1999 draft is notoriously weak, and Nick Boynton would yet again get selected in the first round. This time, however, dropping down to Boston at pick 21. He would eventually play over 600 games in the NHL, being a stable and reliable defenseman who earned the reputation of being a tough guy. He would also win a Stanley Cup with the Chicago Blackhawks in 2010, so even if he wasn't flashy, he'll forever shine in the record books. This next story actually involves a duo, Jared Stoll and Matthew Lombardi. Stoll had some hype headed into the 2000 draft as his performance in juniors helped increase his draft stock heavily. He was good enough for Calgary to select him with the 47th pick. And as for Matthew Lombardi, he wasn't taken until the 7th round, which came as a surprise as his massive increase in offensive totals in Victoriaville made Lombardi look like an absolute steal for the Edmonton Oilers. You probably see where this story's going, as the Oilers and Flames despise each other, and after both Stoll and Lombardi failed to agree on a contract, they would both re-enter the 2002 draft. What's funny is that Calgary actually attempted to trade Stoll's rights to the Toronto Maple Leafs, and the deal was almost set in stone, but in typical Leafs fashion, their fax didn't make it in time, thus nullifying the trade. Throughout today's video, every player we've talked about got drafted lower than they originally were taken, but the Oilers at pick 37 would take Jared Stoll 10 spots higher than he originally went, thus quote, ticking off the Flames in the process, and because of this, out of pure spite, Calgary would take Matthew Lombardi 90th overall, 125 spots higher than he was originally taken. Peak Battle of Alberta. Stoll would later go on to post a 68-point season in Edmonton and play a role in getting the team to the Stanley Cup final in 2006. Numerous concussions, however, would derail his career, and his offensive numbers were never the same. As for Lombardi, he too faced some concussions of his own, including one from Wings Darian Hatcher during the Flames 2004 Stanley Cup run. Lombardi's totals were always decent, having 3 seasons where he'd post over 45 points. He was also a part of the trade that sent Onyekwe to Calgary. Both Stoll and Lombardi's careers seemed extremely similar from start to finish, except there's one thing that separates the two. Jared Stoll would hoist the cup. To end today's video, we're going to talk about perhaps one of the most famous players to ever be drafted twice. As drafted in the 7th round of the 2010 draft, Frederick Anderson would get selected by the Carolina Hurricanes, where he wouldn't play a single game. Working his way through the SHL and the Danish League, Anderson had the potential to become an absolute steal, but like everyone else, he failed to come to terms on a contract. GM JR stated, quote, "We tried to sign Frederick to a contract and made him aware that we felt there was an opportunity here for him to earn 1 or 2 NHL spots during training camp." However, Anderson might not have felt the same way. At the time, Carolina's goaltending pool was backlogged with players. In order for Anderson to play, he would have to beat out 5 other netminders to get the starting job. And since Freddie believed there was no chance he beats out Cam Ward, he re-entered the draft in 2012, this time getting selected by the Anaheim Ducks in the 3rd round. Once Jonas Hiller departed, the net belonged to Anderson, and he showed the Canes that they truly missed out. But once the Maple Leafs, in need of a #1 goaltender, offered the Ducks a deal they couldn't refuse, he would get shipped off to Toronto. Anderson was amazing in Toronto, but come playoff time, he would tend to disappoint and would often be the scapegoat for all the Game 7 defeats. When it was time to hit free agency, Anderson would hit the open market, and you'd never guess where he ended up. Yeah, Carolina. 12 years after being drafted by them, he would actually play for them, and when he was healthy, he was lights out.
Up on the forecheck is Kucherov, centers it on front, it's on the goal line, and Anderson dives across to keep it out. One-timer by Stamkos, fanned on it.
Straight up to the crossbar, look at this. It is bouncing a bit. I mean, that had Anderson beaten by 5 feet. Hits the crossbar, goes straight